Ma'am, this section is reserved for family members and special guests only. The voice came from a young soldier, no more than 20 years old. His uniform was perfectly neat. His back was perfectly straight, but his eyes showed the tired frustration of someone stuck on a long, formal duty. He pointed vaguely with a starched glove toward a distant hill where a small gathering of regular visitors stood. Samantha didn't move. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a simple, neat bun, and her attention stayed on the service happening about 100 yards away. She felt the heavy pull of memory and purpose settling into her chest. "I understand," she said, her voice quiet but carrying over the peaceful funeral silence. "I'm here to show my respect." The young soldier's jaw tightened a little, showing his annoyance. He was following his instructions. He had a roster of people who were allowed, and this woman wasn't on it. He saw a regular person standing out among the generals and honored veterans in their dress uniforms. "The public area is that way," he repeated, his tone making clear there was no room for discussion. He was about to walk away when Samantha raised her hand. In her palm sat a heavy bronze coin, its edges worn smooth from use. He glanced at it, confused. It wasn't a regular military coin. It was clearly special, showing the image of a helicopter with a Valkyrie's wing behind it. He saw no name, no rank, just an unfamiliar symbol. He dismissed it with a shake of his head. "Ma'am, I can't help you. Please go to the public area." His rejection was complete. He had made his choice, and as far as he was concerned, the matter was finished. But Samantha Morgan hadn't flown a damaged Black Hawk through intense enemy fire by accepting the first no she heard. She stood her ground, her calm gaze silently challenging his confidence. The young soldier, whose name was Miller, felt a spike of irritation. The woman wasn't yelling or making trouble, which somehow made it worse. Her quiet resistance disrupted the solemn, peaceful nature of the funeral. He pulled his shoulders back, puffed out his chest a bit in a show of power that felt more like acting than real. "Ma'am, I'm not going to ask you again. This is a restricted zone. I'm aware of the restrictions, specialist," Samantha said, her voice still frustratingly even. She put the challenge coin back in her pocket and pulled out a simple leather wallet. She took out her VA identification card and held it out. "Samantha Morgan." Miller took the card, barely touching her fingers. He looked at the photo, then the name Morgan. It meant nothing to him. It wasn't on the list of high government officials, foreign visitors, or the nation's top military leaders. It wasn't on the family list. He gave it back with a sigh that was almost disrespectful. "This doesn't help your case. You're not on the approved list. Could you check with the family contact person? They're expecting me." "The family is grieving right now," he said sharply, his professional manner starting to slip. "They're not seeing visitors. Those are my orders." Seeing a standoff building, a staff sergeant with a chest full of military honors and the hardened appearance of a long military career walked over casually. "What's going on here, Miller?" "The woman won't move," Sergeant Davis, Miller said, feeling relieved to have support. "She insists on getting into the main service. She's not on the list." Sergeant Davis turned his tough, serious gaze on Samantha. It was a stare meant to intimidate young soldiers and remind civilians of their place. He was someone who lived by the rules, who saw things as either right or wrong, allowed or not allowed. He looked at her plain blue shirt, her regular pants, her simple bag. She didn't fit the picture. "Let me see your ID," he commanded, his voice rough and low. Samantha handed over her VA card once more. Davis took it and studied it much longer than needed, tilting it toward the light as if the words might disappear. "Morgan," he said quietly, testing the sound of the name. "I don't know that one." "Did you serve under the general?" "I did," Samantha replied. Davis's eyes tightened. "In what role?" His question was like an interrogation. He was checking her story, hunting for something that didn't add up. "I was a pilot." A small, barely noticeable smirk appeared on his mouth. "A pilot? Sure. Look, ma'am, lots of people think they had a personal connection to the general. He was an impressive man, but this day belongs to those who really knew him, his family, his close staff. We can't just let everyone who met him once walk around in here." His tone was cutting and dismissive, hanging in the air like a physical weight. Several mourners nearby, colonels and senior sergeants in their dress uniforms, started to move slower as they passed by. The quiet argument had caught their focus. The moment was becoming a small break in the peaceful gathering of those in mourning. "Sergeant, I'm not someone who simply shook his hand once," Samantha said, her calm a wall around her. "I need to be here." "Everyone thinks they need to be here," Davis shot back louder now. He was clearly enjoying his role as guardian, the chance to be the one in control. He pressed a button on his communication device. "Look, I can make this simple or I can make it hard. You can walk over to the public hill or I can call the military police and have them take you off base. Your choice." The warning was clear. He was using the full strength of the armed forces to move one woman a few hundred feet. He saw her as an annoyance, maybe a misguided admirer or possibly someone trying to grab some of the general's fame for herself. He couldn't see the truth. He gestured toward the worn leather bag on her shoulder. "You're wearing military symbols on civilian clothes," he said, reaching for a regulation he barely remembered, but that sounded convincing enough. He was building his story not for paperwork, but for the people watching. He needed them to think he was being fair. His gaze stopped on a small round patch sewn onto the bag's front flap. It was faded, the color worn away by a much stronger sun than Virginia's. It showed a helicopter inside a special cross, the symbol for medical rescue flights, a dust-off patch. To Sergeant Davis, it was just one more unauthorized detail, a piece in this woman's made-up story. "What's that supposed to be?" he asked, his voice filled with scorn. "Some kind of fan club patch." As he spoke, everything around Samantha seemed to fade away. The gray of Arlington disappeared, replaced by the bright, sun-baked landscape of Kandahar province. The smell of earth and grass vanished, replaced by the memory scent of hot oil from machinery, bitter gunpowder smell, and the iron smell of blood. The patch on her bag wasn't just embroidered cloth anymore. It was a door to the past. She was back inside her Blackhawk, feeling the vibration of the rotors like a heartbeat through her whole body. She felt the jolt as the helicopter touched down in a cloud of brown dust. The rear door dropping before the aircraft had even fully landed. She heard the frantic, desperate yells of the ground crew as they loaded a stretcher. The soldier lying there was pale and quiet, his arm hanging over the side showing the 2nd Infantry Division patch, General Wallace's soldiers. Through the confusion, she heard her pilot's steady, calming voice through the headset, a man she depended on with her life more times than she could count. His voice breaking through the static and engine roar was like a rope. "We're not leaving anyone. Morgan, get them aboard." The memory lasted less than a second, a moment of complete sensory experience. But it felt more real than the proud sergeant in front of her. That patch wasn't a prize or trophy. It was proof. It was a piece of her spirit she'd left in the dust of a war the world had forgotten. A war that Sergeant Davis, with his safe base ribbons and polished appearance, couldn't possibly grasp. She blinked, and the green grounds of Arlington came back into view. Her face hadn't changed, but something deep inside her had become solid as steel. A short distance away, partially hidden by a large old tree, stood a man whose pain was visible in the deep lines on his face. Command Sergeant Major Reynolds, who had retired from service, carried himself with military strength even in his dark civilian suit. He'd given 30 years to the military, with 20 of those years working closely with General Wallace. The two had risen together from the beginning stages of their careers to positions of significant responsibility in the military. Wallace had been the officer, the driving force, the strategic thinker. Reynolds had been his support, his moral center, and his closest friend. He'd noticed the trouble at the gate. At first, his reaction was frustration. A funeral for a leader like Wallace needed complete quiet and order, but as he watched, his frustration became fascination. The woman was unnaturally composed. He'd seen that kind of control before. He'd watched young soldiers before they broke down doors and experienced commanders when things went wrong. It was the composure of someone who had endured hardship and knew without doubt what she was able to do. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but he could read their body language clearly. The two guards were standing tall and acting tough, while the woman stayed still and calm. He stepped a bit closer, examining her for any hints. Plain outfit, ordinary looking at first, but then he noticed something. The bag, and on the bag, that patch. The worn rescue insignia hit him like a wave of memory. His thoughts jumped back 10 years to a tense command post filled with radio voices and the smell of stale coffee. He recalled General Wallace, back then just a brigadier, packing back and forth like an animal in a cage, listening to the desperate messages from a scout group that had been attacked and trapped. They were taking losses, ammunition was running out, and there was no air support available. It looked hopeless. Then a different voice came through the noise, belonging to a female aviator, composed, steady, almost peaceful. Her call sign was Valkyrie. She was on a rescue mission nearby and had heard their message, even though she'd been told to avoid the dangerous zone. She said she was going in. Reynolds recollected Wallace getting on the radio, commanding her to step back, warning her it would be suicidal. And he remembered her simple, terrifying response. "Sir, you have wounded and I have space." Reynolds looked back at the woman being confronted by Sergeant Davis. He saw the blonde hair. He caught Davis saying her name, his voice full of mockery. Morgan. The name and the call sign came together in his mind. Valkyrie Samantha Morgan. A terrible feeling washed over the retired sergeant major. His hands started to shake from a fierce, protective anger. They weren't simply being disrespectful to a former soldier. They were dishonoring the memory of the very man they should have been celebrating. They were sending away one of the heroes from Wallace's own history. He made a decision instantly. He turned from the scene and took out his phone as he walked quickly away from the gates. His thumb moved fast across the screen, finding a number he hadn't called in a long time but had kept. It was Major General Carmichael, who now works as a senior officer on the Joint Staff. Carmichael had served as Wallace's right hand when they were in Afghanistan. He would know what this meant. The call was picked up on the second ring. "Carmichael, sir, it's CSM Reynolds, retired." His voice was quiet and urgent, his words clipped short. "I'm at Arlington for Wallace's service." "Sergeant Major, it's good to hear from you, though I'm sorry it's under these circumstances. I don't have time for talking, sir." Reynolds cut him off, his voice hard. "There's a problem here at the entrance to the ceremony. They're refusing entry to a woman. Her name is Morgan, Samantha Morgan." There was quiet on the line. Reynolds could almost hear the general thinking things through. "She has a dust-off patch on her bag, sir." Reynolds pushed on, wanting to be absolutely certain. "The one from Kandahar. Her call sign is Valkyrie." The silence that followed was thick with sudden realization and shock. When Carmichael spoke again, his voice was tight with barely held fury. "Stay there, Sergeant Major. Don't let her leave. I'm coming there now." The line went quiet. Reynolds put his phone away. He turned and watched the two guards who had now been joined by a first sergeant getting more hostile. He didn't step in directly. It wasn't his place anymore, but he stayed close, a quiet, observant guardian. Help was on the way. Inside a protected office in the Pentagon, Major General Carmichael threw his phone down on his desk hard enough to startle his helper. "Get me the records for a chief warrant officer, Samantha Morgan," he shouted, his face showing fury. "Call sign Valkyrie. Right now." His helper, a young but very skilled captain, didn't pause to ask questions. He recognized that voice. A crisis was happening. His fingers flew across the keyboard, getting into the military's personnel records. "Morgan, Samantha, here she is, sir. Warrant officer, flight crew. Cross-reference her deployments with General Wallace's assignments." OEF 2010 to 2012, Carmichael ordered, already putting on his service jacket. The captain's eyes grew wide as he scrolled through the information. Page after page of awards, service records, and official reports. "Sir, this is unbelievable. Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses, Silver Star, multiple air medals, a lot with the V for bravery marking." He paused, reading from a citation on the monitor, his voice quiet with amazement. October 12, 2011. Under severe and accurate enemy fire, then CW-2 Morgan flew her helicopter multiple times into a contested zone to bring out 17 critically wounded soldiers. Even though her aircraft took serious damage to the tail rotor and windscreen, and her co-pilot was seriously hurt, she brought out all the injured and flew the damaged aircraft back to base. "Sir, the officer who recommended her for the Distinguished Service Cross was Brigadier General Wallace." Carmichael's teeth were so tightly clenched that a muscle moved in his jaw. "He didn't just recommend her, Captain. He told me personally that if the President ever asked him to name the bravest soldier he'd ever known, he'd say her name without hesitation." He grabbed his military hat from its stand. "Get me transportation. Inform General Peterson's office we're coming. Emergency status. Tell them Valkyrie is at the gate and they're turning her away." Back at the funeral grounds, Sergeant Davis and Specialist Miller had been joined by their direct supervisor, a first sergeant whose perfectly arranged uniform and tired but commanding presence signaled that talking was over. He hadn't asked Samantha to explain herself. He'd only been told that someone was causing a problem. His job was to fix it. "Ma'am," he started, his voice empty of any feeling. "You've been told multiple times to go to the public viewing area. You have refused to obey. You are now disrupting a state funeral." He took a deliberate step forward, stepping too close into her space. "I am giving you one last order. Leave this space right now. If you don't follow this command, the military police will take you off base. You will get a ticket for entering restricted areas. And given that," he said, pointing a mean finger at the patch on her bag, "you might also get charged for wearing military markings without permission. Do you understand what I'm saying?" It was the ultimate disrespect, the last terrible offense. To be called a liar and a fraud, a person stealing honor, at the funeral of the man who owed his life to her and to the lives of his men. Something hot and furious flashed in Samantha's eyes. But when she spoke, her words were as cold and quiet as the stones around them marking the graves. "I understand what you're saying, First Sergeant," she said, "but you don't know who you're talking to." Before the first sergeant could threaten her again, a low sound of approaching cars cut through the air. Three black official sedans, their lights off but their purpose clear, drove silently up along the service path behind the security line. The guards turned, their anger replaced suddenly by confusion. The doors of the first car opened and Major General Carmichael stepped out, his movements fast and angry. His assistant followed, along with a female colonel with full rank. But it was the person who emerged from the second car that made the three guards' faces go white. General Peterson, a four-star officer and the current head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, got out of the car. He was supposed to be giving the main speech. Instead, he was here at the gate, and his expression was ice-cold fury. The first Sergeant Davis and Miller snapped straight so suddenly it seemed almost mechanical, their bodies locked tight with shock and fear. The group of high-ranking officers moved with one clear purpose. General Peterson walked directly past the terrified guards like they weren't even there. He didn't slow down, didn't even look at them until he was standing right in front of Samantha Morgan. The moment crackled with intensity. All the people nearby had stopped and were completely focused on what was happening. General Peterson looked at Samantha, his hard face softening into deep respect and real sorrow. He said nothing. Instead, he lifted his right hand in a salute so sharp, so perfect it could have been in a training video. It was a sign of honor and deep respect, from one of the most powerful military leaders in the world to the simple woman in the blue shirt. Right away, Major General Carmichael, the colonel, and every other military person in sight followed their leader's example. A flood of salutes rippled outward through the crowd, a silent, powerful way of showing appreciation that moved through the scene and left the three guards standing by themselves in their ignorance. After a long moment, General Peterson put his hand down. "Chief Morgan," he said, his voice full and rich, carrying a feeling that stunned everyone listening. "It is an honor to see you. General Wallace spoke of you often. He once told me that without Valkyrie, he would have come home from Kandahar wrapped in a flag 10 years ago." He turned not just to the guards, but to all those assembled, his voice growing louder with authority, making sure all could hear what he was saying. "For those of you who don't know this woman, let me tell you who she is. This is Chief Warrant Officer Samantha Morgan, retired." On the night of October 12th, 2011, in the Arandanda Valley, a place most of us hope we never have to go, then CW2 Morgan flew her rescue helicopter, call sign Dustoff 71, directly into the heart of danger. He paused, letting the importance of his words settle. A group of Rangers under then Brigadier General Wallace's command were surrounded, taking heavy losses and about to be defeated. Air support was unavailable due to the serious danger. It was meant to end badly, but Chief Morgan, hearing their calls on the radio, disobeyed an order to stay clear of the area. While her aircraft was taking continuous machine gun and rocket fire, with her co-pilot seriously wounded and her tail rotor destroyed, she didn't land just one time or two times, but 3 times in that death zone. 3 times she flew into the shooting. She physically helped wounded men onto her aircraft while her crew sent out covering fire. She brought out 17 men that night. 17 sons, spouses, and fathers got to go home because this woman refused to let them go. He let his gaze move across the whole crowd, across the generals and the regular soldiers, the politicians and the families. General Wallace is being laid to rest here today because he lived to finish a 30-year military career. He got to see his grandkids born. He lived because of what this woman did. The true hero of that day is not the man we're burying. As wonderful as he was, the hero of that day is standing right in front of us. General Peterson then turned his frozen stare on the 3 guards. The first sergeant seemed to shrink inside his own skin. "First Sergeant," the general said, his voice quiet and menacing. "You and your people will be at my office at the Pentagon at 1600 hours. You will explain to me in very precise detail how your people made so many mistakes. You didn't confirm who she was. You didn't try to calm the situation. You didn't use basic thinking. But your worst mistake was failing to notice. You failed to truly see the soldier in front of you. You noticed she was a woman in a blue shirt and you made a judgment. That snap decision, First Sergeant, that careless, thoughtless bias, eats away at the system from the inside. You are a disgrace to the uniform you're wearing and to the honor of the man you should be celebrating." The first sergeant opened his mouth, beginning to stammer an apology, but the general stopped him with a sharp hand gesture. He faced Samantha again, his stern look becoming gentle once more. "Chief, what should they take away from this? What do I tell them they should have done? All attention turned to Samantha. She held herself with a calm strength that seemed to come from deep inside her. She didn't look at the general, but at the pale, frightened young specialist Miller. "General," she said, her voice strong and clear. "Standards are there for a reason. They keep us safe. They make sure the job gets done. They don't care about gender. They don't care what color your skin is or how you look. The issue isn't the standard itself. The problem comes when we pick and choose who we're going to hold to it. Don't lower your standards, just apply them equally. That's all there is." As she spoke about standards, her mind jumped back one final time, not to shooting and disorder, but to the tense moment inside her aircraft before the final approach. The warning lights were glowing bright like decorations. Alarms were shrieking through her headset, and the aircraft was shaking violently. Through the cracked and damaged windscreen, she could see flashing gunfire from the trees. It was impossible circumstances. She heard General Wallace's voice, raw with desperation, through the radio. "Valkyrie, you can't land here. We're taking concentrated fire. I'm commanding you to turn back." And she heard her own voice, sounding like someone else's, impossibly steady, pushing through her own terror. "Roger, sir, but you have wounded and I have room. I'm coming in hot." That was the real standard, not one in any rule book, but one carved into her heart. You never leave anyone, not ever. And you hold that standard for all people, regardless of the cost. Over the following weeks, a quiet but significant change took place inside the military district managing Washington. A complete rewrite of procedures for ceremonial guards came out with fresh focus on calming situations and properly checking facts. A new required training on implicit bias that included heavily filtered information about what happened at Arlington was sent out across all groups. First Sergeant Davis was quietly moved to a different type of job in a far-off location, a place where his career would quietly disappear. One Saturday afternoon, Samantha was at the military store on Fort Mayer, her shopping basket half full, trying to decide between two types of coffee. She was just a regular customer, a woman in jeans and a simple shirt, completely unremarkable. "Ma'am," she turned. It was Specialist Miller, the young guard from that day at the funeral. He wore normal clothes and seemed even younger out of his stiff uniform. He stood with his shopping basket, his eyes on the floor, his whole body tense. "Ma'am, Chief," he stammered, finally looking up at her. His cheeks flushed with shame. "I wanted to find you to apologize the right way. There's no excuse for what I did, for what I said. It was wrong, and I'm sorry." Samantha watched him for a moment. She didn't see meanness in his expression, only real and deep regret. She saw a young soldier who'd made a mistake and had learned a harsh public lesson. She let out a small, tired breath. "You're young, Specialist," she said, her voice tender. "You have years of service ahead of you if you choose it. You learned something that day. A lot of people live their whole lives and never figure that out. Don't waste what you learned." He stared at her, needing her to forgive him. But she gave him something more valuable. She gave him direction. "See the soldier, Miller," she said simply. "Not who they are on the outside. See the soldier first. Every single moment, that's all." She gave him a small nod, barely visible, a way of saying it was finished. Then she turned back to her coffee choices, leaving him standing there with his lesson and a future he had to work to earn. The bravery of former soldiers like Samantha Morgan shows us the greatest qualities of who we are as a nation. To celebrate their service and discover more incredible stories of women who served, please like, share, and follow She's Valor.